Multi-level governance is an approach in political science and public administration theory that originated from studies on European integration. Political scientists Liesbet, Hooghe and Gary Marx developed the concept of multi-level governance in the early 1990s and have continuously been contributing to the research program in a series of articles. The theory resulted from the study of the new structures that were put in place by the EU in 1992. Multi-level governance gives expression to the idea that there are many interacting authority structures at work in the emergent global political economy. It illuminates the intimate entanglement between the domestic and international levels of authority, origins and significance of the concept of multi-level governance. Multi-level governance is a recent concept, having first entered the lexicon of political science around 15 years ago as comparativists became reacquainted with European integration and discovered that authority was shifting not only from central states up to Europe, but also down to subnational authorities. The first efforts to understand this were descriptive, spawning concepts that have generated an extensive literature. Multi-level, polycentric, and multi-layer governance emphasize the dispersion of decision-making from the local to the global level. In recent years, these concepts have cross-pollinated subfields of political science including European studies and decentralization, federalism and international organization, public policy and public-private governance, local governance, and transnational governance. The authors of a recent survey of the literature on the structure of government conclude that we attribute many of the recent cutting-edge theoretical contributions in political science to studies of multi-level governance, and they note that although students of federalism considered the current subject matter of the field to be based on well-defined, well-rooted and broadly accepted ideas, they were nevertheless open to a new flowering of federal theory as a result of fertilization by these new MLG theoretical developments. However, there is nothing entirely new under the sun, though scarcely recognized at the time. This research revives a rich tradition in political science represented by Carl Deutsch on the effect of societal transactions on government structure, Robert Dahl on the virtues and vices of multi-level democracy, and Steinrockin on identity and territorial politics. Application of the concept, multi-level governance and the European Union. The study of the European Union has been characterized by two different theoretical phases. The first phase was dominated by studies from the field of international relations. In the second phase, these studies were revised and insights from, among others, public policy were added. The most straightforward way of understanding this theoretical shift is to see it as a move away from treating the EU as an international organization similar to others to seeing it as something unique among international organizations. The uniqueness of the EU relates both to the nature and to the extent of its development. This means that in some areas of activity the EU displays more properties related to national political systems than to those of international organizations. The theory of multi-level governance belongs to the second phase. Multi-level governance characterizes the changing relationships between actors situated at different territorial levels, both from the public and the private sectors. The multi-level governance theory crosses the traditionally separate domains of domestic and international politics and highlights the increasingly fading distinction between these domains in the context of European integration. Multi-level governance was first developed from a study of EU policy and then applied to EU decision-making more generally. An early explanation referred to multi-level governance as a system of continuous negotiation among nested governments at several territorial tiers, and described how supranational, national, regional, and local local governments are enmeshed in territorially overarching policy networks. The theory emphasized both the increasingly frequent and complex interactions between governmental actors and the increasingly important dimension of non-state actors that are mobilized in cohesion policy making and in the EU policy more generally. As such, multi-level governance raised new and important questions about the role, power and authority of states. No other international form of cooperation is characterized by such far-reaching integration as the European Union. This becomes evident by the number and scope of policy areas covered by the European Union and the way policy is developed. The European Union can be characterized by a mix of classic intergovernmental cooperation between sovereign states and far-reaching supranational integration. Multi-level governance within the EU is understood as respecting competences, sharing responsibilities and cooperating between the various levels of governance, the EU, the member states and the regional and local authorities. In this context, it refers to the principle of subsidiarity, which places decisions as close as possible to the citizens and ensures that action at union level is justified in light of the possibilities available at national, regional or local level. In practice, multi-level governance within the EU is about participation and coordination between all levels of government, both in the decision-making process and in the implementation or evaluation of European policies. The combination of communal decision-making with the wide area of policy areas results in a deep entanglement of the member states' national policy levels with the European policy level. This entanglement is one of the basic principles of the multi-level governance theory. The multi-level governance theory describes the European Union as a political system with interconnected institutions that exist at multiple levels, and that have unique policy features. The European Union is a political system with a European layer, a national layer and a regional layer. These layers interact with each other in two ways. First, across different levels of government, and second, with other relevant actors within the same level. Concerning with the changes of the institutional design of the European Union, the current model governance has been shaped as a setup of constraints upon political margin of discretion, applying the central tenet of order liberalism with the aim to use strong rules in order to reduce the discretionary exercise of powers by institutions so as to avoid an arbitrary use of them. This principle has achieved an extreme effect at the European level, that one not to avoid arbitrary use of political powers but to keep political responsibility and participation out of the decision-making process. As Laruffa concludes, it is quite clear that such a model of governance, which is made only by rules without any role for a democratic policy-making process, imposes a de facto limit on the political rights of the European citizens. This means that there is a control exercised by rules over the European citizens rather than a control by the European citizens over rules and policies. The European Union, multi-level governance in practice. Within the European Union, nearly 95,000 local and regional authorities currently have significant powers in key sectors such as education, the environment, economic development, town and country planning, transport, public services and social policies. These local and regional authorities implement nearly 70% of EU legislation. They help ensure the exercise of European democracy and citizenship. Special rights and competences for regions, cities and communities are supposed to enable and preserve diversity of governance at local and regional level. By thinking beyond traditional EU member states relations, the EU multi-level governance concept further strengthens regional and transnational cooperation. In a broader sense, this concept concept also includes the participation of non-state players like economic and social partners and civil society in the decision-making process of all levels of governance. The Treaty of Lisbon is an important step towards multi-level governance. The Treaty of Lisbon represents an important step towards institutional recognition of multi-level governance in the way the European Union operates. It strengthens the competencies and influence of local and regional authorities in the community decision-making process, giving roles to national parliaments and the Committee of the Regions, and enshrines the territorial dimension of the European Union, notably territorial cohesion, as part of the process of European integration. The Committee of the Regions has established a system to monitor the compliance with the subsidiarity through the whole EU policy and lawmaking process. Multi-level governance within the EU is an ongoing process. Nevertheless, multi-level governance within the EU is a dynamic and ongoing process. On 16 June 2009, the Committee of the Regions adopted a white paper on multi-level governance which recommended specific mechanisms and instruments for stimulating all stages of the European decision-making process. This document, together with the follow-up opinion, Building a European Culture of Multi-Level Governance, affirmed the committee's political commitment to multi-level governance, proposing a first political project for building Europe in partnership. As a follow-up to the 2009 White Paper on multi-level governance, the committee developed a scoreboard on multi-level governance to monitor on a yearly basis the development of multi-level governance at European Union level. The Charter for Multi-Level Governance in Europe. On 3 April 2014, the Committee of the Regions adopted a Charter for Multi-Level Governance calling public authorities of all levels of governance to use and promote multi-level governance in the future undertakings. The Charter is opened for signature to all European Union local and regional authorities. European and national associations of local and regional authorities, as well as local and regional authorities network, are invited to officially commit to multi-level governance principles, giving the Charter the formal support. National and European political figures wishing to back up the Charter are also invited to declare the support multi-level governance beyond the European Union. The point of departure for multi-level governance was Europe, but recent books and articles have dealt with the dispersion of authority away from central states in Latin America, Asia, and North America. Decentralization has been at least as marked in Latin America as in Europe over the past 2 decades, and several Asian countries have decentralized in the past decade. Dispersion of authority above the national state is most evident in the EU, but it is not sui generis. A recent survey counts 32 regional IGOs pooling authority over quite wide areas of policy and which cover all but a handful of states in the world. Today, the number of governmental and non-governmental international organizations has increased markedly over the past 2 decades, as has the scope, range and intrusiveness. Cross-border interdependence, from migration to climate change to terrorism, has stimulated regional organization in many parts of the world. Vertical and horizontal dimension of multi-level governance. The vertical dimension refers to the linkages between higher and lower levels of government, including their institutional, financial, and informational aspects. Here, local capacity building and incentives for effectiveness of sub-national levels of government are crucial issues for improving the quality and coherence of public policy. The horizontal dimension refers to cooperation arrangements between regions or between municipalities. These agreements are increasingly common as a means by which to improve the effectiveness of local public service delivery and implementation of development strategies. Consequences and practical relevance of multi-level governance. There has been an intensification of research on the consequences as well as the character of multi-level governance. The concept was developed as a tool of pure research, but it now motivates policymakers. For the late 1990s, the European Commission began to refer to its own mission as one of achieving multi-level governance, especially in cohesion policy. In 2001, the Commission set up a Committee on Multi-Level Governance to contribute to its White Paper on Governance. José Manuel Barroso, President of the European Commission, claims that the multi-level system of governance on which our European regional policy is based provides a key boost to the Union's competitive edge, and that, in the current economic crisis, multi-level governance must be a priority. In an October 2008 resolution, the European Parliament called on the Member States to develop as quickly as possible the practical measures set out in the First Action Programme, with a view to strengthening multi-level governance. In 2009, 344 representatives of elected regional and local authorities across the EU approved a resolution on their European Union Charter for Multi-Level Governance, which would bring localities and regions into European democratic decision-making. This theme has been taken up by several political parties, including the European People's Party, representing Christian democratic parties in the European Parliament, which recently stated that multi-level governance should be one of the guiding principles of the EU, an integral part of any European strategy or policy where local and regional authorities are widely implicated, and monitored closely to ensure that it is indeed being put into practice on the ground. International organizations have also taken positions on the issue. In 2009, the United Nations Development Programme released a report as delivering human security through multi-level governance, which argued that the two-level approach to international relations is being replaced by a much more complex multi-level system of governance that also involves local, subnational providers of public goods as well as regional governance actors acting at a supranational but not a global level. The World Bank has commissioned a series of studies examining multi-level governance. The United Nations has a research and training institute on comparative regional integration that studies multi-level regulatory processes and the relations between sub- and supranational regional governance, and the OECD has created a directorate on multi-level governance. However, the consequences of multi-level governance are debated. In the eyes of its detractors, multi-level governance exacerbates corruption, leads to gridlock, engenders moral hazard, constrains redistribution, obfuscates accountability, and wastes money. Research on both causes and consequences of multi-level governance is ongoing, and more information about the subnational as well as the international dimension of multi-level governance is available in the context of larger data sets. Multi-level governance of climate change in cities. Global climate change is being contributed to by ever-increasing levels of greenhouse gas emissions emanating from decisions and activities of individuals and organizations at local, regional, national and international levels. Cities are suggested to contribute up to 75% of global carbon dioxide emissions, reflecting the increasing proportions of global populations living and working in cities. As we know, tackling climate change is an extensive, time-consuming and costly task, a task that cannot be achieved solely through the policy implementation and regulation from central governments and bodies alone. It has become increasingly clear that nation-states will be unable to commit to and meet international targets and agreements for offsetting climate change without engaging with the activity of subnational and local action. hereby warranting the extreme importance of multi-level governance of climate change within cities. Forms of governance at multi-levels have taken off increasingly at the local scale, building upon the notion of think global, act local. In cities in particular, greenhouse gas emissions stem from certain activities that originate from specific places, bringing about thought that the local scale is the most appropriate political scale to produce necessary offsets in emissions. Cities are exemplary of such specific places in which local governance action can and will help reduce GHG emissions. The levels of governance authority handed down to local governments within cities has been perceived to outdo policy goals within the national and international arena, with some local governments taking on their own initiatives for tackling urban climate change. This sets an important stance to which the local scale of multi-level governance is important for tackling global climate change within the urban arena. Four distinct modes of governance exist within the dynamics of climate change in cities. Each stems from the local level with the ability of being implemented on multi-scales to mitigate and adapt to urban climate change. Self-governing is the capacity of local governments to govern its own activities such as improving energy efficiency within a designated city, without the burdening pressure to meet targets of increased energy efficiencies set by national governments. A form of self-governing within multi-level systems is horizontal collaboration, where cities may collaborate with regions, demonstrating multi-levels of governance to tackle urban climate change. Imperative to the success of city climate change policy governing through enabling is the coordination and facilitation of partnerships with private organizations by the local government. National governments also implement this mode of governance to implement policy and action within cities. Governing through provision, a form of vertical collaboration along with governing through enabling, applies itself to the multi-levels of governance. Climate change in cities is tackled here through the shaping of and delivery of services and resources, with additional support aided to local governments from regional and national authorities. Lastly, another form of vertical collaboration is governing through regulation. Such regulation characterizes traditional forms of authoritative governance, exemplifying local and nation-state relations, almost nearly covering the entirety of the multi-level governance scale. Subnational integration of climate actions within the various initiatives of the Low-Emission Development Strategies Global Partnership. The Thematic Working Group on Subnational Integration was created in 2013 to support learning and facilitate collaboration between national and subnational governments for accelerated effective climate actions. The SNIWG realizes several activities at global and regional levels, including organizing panels at multiple regional and global forums, hosting peer learning discussions, publishing reports and case studies, along with facilitating technical workshops, webinars and providing advisory remote expert assistance on LEDS support upon request. This process has generated observations, feedback and insights on the potential of the vertical integration and coordination of subnational climate actions to accelerate and scale up both local and global emission reductions. Multi-level governance theory and empirical evidence demonstrate that the coordination and vertical integration of climate actions can help alleviate domestic political constraints, raise national government ambitions for more aggressive intended nationally determined government contributions and GHG mitigation commitments, scale up, as well as unlock additional and new mitigation opportunities at the subnational level, accelerate the effective implementation of national targets, strategies and development priorities by localizing them. This can also provide opportunities for bundled approaches and increasing co-benefits by linking local priorities with diverse development objectives, improve the consistency of subnational and national climate datasets, strengthening MRV, create a more bankable, low-risk environment for infrastructure finance and private sector investments, enable safe learning and strengthen domestic institutions, address recognized challenges and limits to subnational non-state actor climate actions, expand and accelerate the flow of international public and private climate finance to cities, urban infrastructure and local priorities, help address some of the persistent collective action challenges to multilateral climate agreements. Cities for Climate Protection Program. The Cities for Climate Protection Program is one example of multi-level governance of climate change. Roles and responsibilities are shared within different levels of governance, from state actors to non-state actors. Membership consists of 40 large cities worldwide, with local governments often working in close connection with national governments. However, the CCP can overlook the activity of nation-states, giving local governments the opportunity to amend positions of policy implementation and regulation for offsetting urban climate change, which may be of a controversial nature to national governments, thus illustrating even though climate change in cities can be addressed and governed at local, regional, national and international levels, it does not always follow a hierarchical order. Criticism on multi-level governance theory. Many of the problems associated with multi-level governance revolve around the notion of levels. The very idea of levels and levels of analysis is imbued with hierarchical implications. However, different levels of social spaces often interact to cut across with one another in complex ways that are not strictly hierarchical. To what extent can levels be identified at all? The notion that international bodies constitute a discrete level of authority and governance is contestable. International regulatory networks may not be separate sources of authority but instead represent the reconstitution of state authority and the pursuit of state-level governance by other means. While territorial levels make sense when we're referring to public forms of authority, they seem less compatible with private and market forms of authority. Another criticism on the theory of multi-level governance is that it's not really a proper theory, rather that it is an approach. The main difference between multi-level governance and other theories of integration is that it gets rid of the continuum, a gray area between intergovernmentalism and supranationalism, and leaves in its place a descriptive structure. This theory does not address the sovereignty of states directly, but instead simply says that a multi-level structure is being created by subnational and supranational actors. One of the main questions of integration theory, namely, the transfer of loyalty and sovereignty between national and supranational entities and the future of this relationship in the EU, is not specifically addressed in this theory. The identification of partial political measures and general macroeconomics is divided on diverse decisional levels. National governments maintain an important decisional role, but the control unlocalizes at supranational level. Individual national sovereignty is dilated in this decisional process, and the supranational institutions have an autonomic role.